Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's webinar. My name is Debbie Johnson, and I am a student of Communications 291 with Tanya Mazurek. I will be your host for this evening's webinar. Please sit back and enjoy as we review some information that we've learned in this class. You will notice a dialog box in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, and in it you will be able to type in any questions that you have for me. I will review those questions and answer them to my best at the end of this session. Well, let's get on with it then. Tonight's topic is nonverbal behavior and cultural context. First, we should start by looking at what communication really is. The definition for communication, as it is defined in our text, states that communication describes the process of sharing meaning by transmitting messages through media such as words, behavior, or material artifacts. Tonight we will focus on the messages that are conveyed through behavior and the effect that culture has on that communication. Next, let's look at how cultural factors affect the communication process. Culture not only dictates who talks with whom and how this communication proceeds, it also helps to determine how people encode messages, the meanings they have for the messages, and the conditions and circumstances under which various messages may or may not be sent, noticed, or interpreted. In fact, our entire repertoire of communicative behaviors is dependent largely on the culture in which we have been raised. Culture, consequently, is the foundation of communication, and when cultures vary, communication practices also vary. This is a quote from Samovar, Porter, and Jane. To really fully understand the effects of culture on the communication process, we need to take one more step back and to look at the communication process itself. In this slide, you'll see that we have the sender, the medium, and the receiver. So the sender encodes the meaning of the message. The medium is the message itself, and the receiver then decodes the meaning of the message. Throughout this communication process, you'll find in the environment some of the noise that may get in between the sender and the receiver, and the culture can often impact that noise greatly. It also can affect the feedback that the receiver sends back as well. Nonverbal communication is defined as messages expressed by other than linguistic means and includes messages transmitted by vocal cues that don't involve language, sighs, laughter, and other assorted noises, and the non-linguistic dimensions of the spoken word, such as volume, rate, pitch, and so on. It also includes features that most people think of when they consider nonverbal communication: body language, gestures, facial expressions, and others. In the next few slides, we are going to look at some of the forms of nonverbal communication that you may be familiar with. Facial expressions. We all know that if someone is smiling at you, you have a sense that they are happy. Their body posture, their gestures with hands, arms, head, etc. The interpersonal distance. So what is your comfort zone? How do you feel when somebody comes into that space? What impact does that have on your communication style? Touching, body contact, eye contact, and we're going to look at that a little bit further too, what that means in different cultures. Clothing, cosmetics, hairstyles, paralanguage, your voice, your pitch, inflection, and even silence. Further forms of nonverbal communication are color symbolism, attitudes towards time and the use of time in business and social interactions. How do you feel if you're on time for an appointment and somebody else is late? How does their attitude toward time affect your communication? Food symbolism and the social use of meals. We all enjoy being invited to someone's house to share a meal with them. That sets us in mood usually for good conversation and lots of sharing. Next, let's look at what the cultural context does. In high context cultures, feelings and thoughts are not explicitly expressed. Instead, one has to read between the lines and interpret meaning from one's general understanding. However, in low context cultures, where personal and business relationships are more separated and clearly defined, communication media have to be more explicit. Feelings and thoughts are expressed in words, and information is more readily available. The next thing I'd like to do is do a bit of an online poll, and let's just see what you feel. What do you think the percentage of the emotional impact of a message comes from nonverbal sources? So really, how much of our body language and some of the items we've listed previously, how much of that impacts the message that we're sending? 93%, 65%, or 35%? In the upper right-hand corner, please type in your answer and we'll tally those results. Wow, there it is. Look at that. So the majority of you are right. The scientific researchers believe that 93% of the emotional impact of a message comes from the non-verbal sources. However, more conservative researchers would have us believe that 65% is a more realistic number of, the impact of the non-verbal on our message. Congratulations. Look at how smart you all are. You are agreeing with the scientific researchers and believing that 93% of our message is delivered through the nonverbal behaviors. The next slide we're going to talk about is we're going to start looking at some cultural differences in the nonverbal communication and how they can lead to misunderstandings. So for example, avoidance of direct eye contact within our First Nations culture. Within this culture, this is used to communicate attentiveness or respect. However, outside of the culture, this may be seen as a sign of inattentiveness and direct eye contact would be preferred. And I've often seen this working in the courtrooms. There'd be some young Native girls coming in to give evidence. They'd be, seen as looking down and having lowered heads. And oftentimes that was misunderstood by those in power positions such as lawyers and judges. What do we think of when we see aggressively challenging a point with which one disagrees? Often this happens in the African and Canadian cultures. Within this culture, this would be an acceptable means of dialogue and not regarded as verbal abuse or a precursor to violence. However, outside of that culture, others may view this as argumentative and inappropriate, and they may see it as a sign of potential imminent violence. So you could see how this could cause many misunderstandings and difficulties for some folks within that culture, and how others see them when they're looking from the outside in. So one of the things that I noticed in our center is that often in our Canadian culture, I call someone toward me with my curled index finger. So within my culture, this is an acceptable means of asking someone to come and join you. However, outside of this culture, this may be viewed as impolite and even offending, especially in the Filipino culture. We have the opportunity to work with a couple Filipino ladies, and I've done that a couple times where I've just kind of curled that finger and jerked it towards me and expected them to come towards me, and they've seen it as offensive and very impolite and not really sure how to respond to me. So what I've learned from my Filipino friends is that they have a highly developed sensitivity to the nonverbal aspects of communication. And they're considerably less dependent on spoken words than we are. They're very, very observant, and they watch their listeners carefully. They identify body language cues to assess what that person is feeling and thinking sometimes too. We perceive them, as being maybe a little quiet and withdrawn, when in fact they are sitting back and observing us. Excuse me. An eyebrow flash combined with a short look and perhaps a smile expresses their friendly perception and is a silent, mute, quick greeting, which we don't see often in the same light. The Filipino ladies that we have in our center, they smile if they're praising someone. They smile if they're criticizing the other. They smile if they are emotional or have caused a small outrage. They smile if they ask for something. They smile if they're happy. And each situation has its own smile. It is ambiguous, and often it is a conflict-reducing function. But it has caused a few challenges just amongst our team until we've learned what each one of those smiles means. And some on the staff have seen those smiles and feel like they're being dismissed or not really heard. They're not sure if the Filipino ladies have understood what they're asking. So when we are exposed to or have the opportunity to work in an environment with other cultures, what can we do to help? We've talked often at our center about developing a cultural awareness and sensitivity, and we've learned a lot from the ladies as they grow more comfortable and share with us some of the things that we need to be aware of. We've had many, many laughs. We need to practice careful encoding and to be very selective about our transmission and the environment in which we're trying to deliver the message. We need to practice careful decoding of the feedback. And some of the behaviors that we've found to be important to the intercultural communication and to be very successful in that is to practice respect, an interactive posture, being open to the other's message, an orientation to the knowledge so that we understand what is happening with them. Empathy and tolerance of ambiguity. We need to practice an openness and a resilience as well. All of these behaviors, when practiced, will help to make your intercultural communication that much more successful. What have I learned about body language and nonverbal communication across cultures? I have learned a great deal about the body language and the nonverbal communication. We've had the privilege, like I said, of working with the Filipino ladies in our center and also having some young children come in with us. And these children come to us with English as their second language, and they're learning language. They're learning both the Filipino language, the Tagalog dialect, as well as the English language. So we've learned a lot from their nonverbal communication, and they learn as much from us. I mean, oftentimes that's how they get many of the messages that we relay from the staff. But the main thing that I've learned are that joy and happiness are wonderful to see in all cultures. And as you can see by these little children in this picture, they are smiling and happy and feeling free. And that is what is most important. Thank you all for joining tonight in this webinar, and I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. I've learned a great deal from taking this communication class, and I look forward to many, many more. Thank you all, and good night.